Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Stephen Romo in for Hallie today. Americans are, of course, remembering people who did not come home after serving the country overseas this Memorial Day, a pain that is very real for many, as President Biden reminded us of today.
Memorial Day is always a day where pain and pride are mixed together. The hurt is wrapped around the knowledge that your loved one was part of something bigger than any of us.
But there is another memorial fresh in his and the nation's minds. That's of the 19 children and 2 teachers murdered at that school in Uvalde, Texas. Tomorrow, the first of the funerals will begin. The president and first lady have visited to pay their respects. You can see in video here when the president wiped away a tear from his eye. And now his Justice Department is launching a review of the law enforcement response to that horrific attack, looking into why Uvalde School District Police Chief Pete Arredondo made what the head of the Texas Department of Public Safety says was the wrong decision by not having his officers confront that shooter earlier. We'll have the latest on what the president is doing with Josh Lederman. That's coming up in just a second. But we start with Sam Brock in Texas. So, Sam, how are folks on the ground reacting to the president's visit?
They thought that it was appreciated, appropriate, Steve, and certainly soothing. However, as you walk around to these memorials, you'll see plenty of people wearing shirts with statements on them. One of them was from a grandmother that said, "Policy and change, not thoughts and prayers," which is fairly emblematic of how many people here feel at the moment. You can go and hug families, and certainly the president, we know, has been through a ton of personal tragedy himself and is able to share that sort of empathy he's experienced with what their situation is right now. But they want to find out what's going to be happening at the top down in terms of gun policies and also the response of law enforcement. Steve, I will say this. So many people here have been waiting for the city to respond in some capacity because the last press conference we received was last Friday. That was the Department of Public Safety for the state. Had not heard from the city or also from Pete Arredondo, the chief of this local school district, since last Tuesday. We just got a statement in from the office of the mayor here in Uvalde. He says, and I quote, "Our focus on Tuesday is on our families who lost loved ones. We begin burying our children tomorrow," as you mentioned, Steve, at the top of this introduction. He says that Pete Arredondo was elected to the city council. There's nothing in the city charter or Texas Constitution prohibiting him from taking place in that swearing-in ceremony. We do know, Steve, they actually canceled it. It was supposed to be for tomorrow. That's not going to happen, so an opportunity to question lawmakers firsthand, specifically city council members, about what was going on and perhaps speak with Mr. Arredondo. That's not going to happen. The mayor also saying that Arredondo is not part of an investigation as far as he knows, but that the state, the Texas Rangers and DPS are looking into the incident on top, of course, of the mayor asking the federal government to get involved. And the feds right now are doing something that's only happened a handful of times in the last few years, which is a critical incident review of how law enforcement responded to that mass shooting, Steve.
Sam, so many people, so many families there are grieving, but they're also desperate for answers, desperate to hear from Chief Arredondo. You mentioned he was expected to be sworn in, but that was canceled. Is there any idea why that was? And we also know you spoke with family members of Eliana Torres, that one of the 10-year-olds killed in that massacre. What did they tell you about this federal investigation?
We didn't get an answer yet as to why the city council meeting was canceled. We just know that it has been canceled. As far as the family of Eliana Torres, they're devastated. The grandfather told me that he feels like there was a part of him that was taken away, that was ripped out. He has 10 grandchildren. He had a very special relationship with Eliana, who we know was a softball player. She had just made an all-star team, Steve. He purchased a glove for her for that all-star game. She loved to do TikTok videos with her cousin, Unica, who I sat down and spoke with. And Unica said that she's missing a piece of her heart right now as well. It was extremely difficult to hear this. I did ask what they view about the police response, how they're kind of taking this all in. Here's what Eliana's aunt and grandfather told me. Take a listen.
Every question that we ask is why? Why did y'all take so long? Why? And
it's hard to understand.
It's hard.
See, the funny thing is when you read on the police card, to serve the community.
Protect and serve.
To protect and serve. Huh?
What's the purpose of it?
What they did? Nothing.
And really, Steve, ever since Columbine, the paradigm has changed. The protocol for what law enforcement officers are supposed to do if there's an active shooter. Expect that to be at the very center of these investigations. Steve, let me send it back to you.
So many questions going to haunt that town of Uvalde, Texas. Sam Brock, thank you for that update. Let's go now to Josh Letterman in Washington. This, Josh, of course, is a hard day for many people in Uvalde. Also a hard one for President Biden, because this happens to be the 7th anniversary of the death of his son, Beau. What more is he saying about that?
Well, President Biden is reflecting, Stephen, on the fact that his late son, Beau Biden, who was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware, also a combat veteran, having served in Iraq. He didn't die from those injuries. He died of brain cancer years later. But President Biden, in consoling and commemorating Gold Star families today on Memorial Day, also drew a connection between his own personal grief and that of those who are losing and have lost service members, something the president so often does, tying his own grief to those he is trying to console. He noted that just like Gold Star families who have lost U.S. men and women who served in combat, that his son had chosen a life of purpose, something bigger than himself. And he says that is something that families can take comfort in as they're grieving their loved ones.
And Josh, we're, of course, continuing to see images here of the memorials that have been going on for Memorial Day. But I want to go back to something the president said earlier today. He says he's not negotiated with any Republicans just yet to keep the focus on the families, but he also added he's limited as far as what he can do here in this situation to try to help anything on gun reform. What more can you tell us?
Well, the president and White House officials feel like what he can do on his own, Stephen, he's already done, including that executive order the president signed last month cracking down on ghost guns. So they're kind of at the end of their options as far as executive authority. And so it is up to Congress. The president, as you noted, has had a hands-off approach since the Uvalde shooting, leaving it to lawmakers to figure out where there's common ground. Is there actually a possibility of doing something here? But now that his visit to Uvalde is over, this new week is starting, I think that we can expect to see the president get a little bit more involved in at least trying to build public pressure for Congress to do something quickly, because as we have learned from so many of these mass shootings before, there is often a very brief window as the country is, wrapped by tragedy, where there's a focus and renewed momentum. But if you wait too long, that momentum often fades away. The news cycle moves on to something different. And so the White House eager to make sure that they are able to capitalize on the sense that many Americans have in the wake of this tragedy, that it's time to do something about gun violence.
A shockingly brief period you mentioned there, Josh. And we also know tomorrow the president's meeting with New Zealand's prime minister to talk about the Indo-Pacific partnership. But the timing's, of course, apt given her country's strong response to the Christchurch massacre that happened 2 years ago. What more can we expect from that?
Yeah, and in the wake of that massacre, they did not just create, background checks or something on the margins in New Zealand. They banned these military-style weapons and then forced New Zealanders who own them to sell them back to the government. So they actually reduced the number of these high-capacity weapons that were out on the streets in New Zealand, and they've seen a reduction in gun violence. The other very interesting thing the White House says that we should be paying attention to during this meeting the president will have with the leader of New Zealand is a focus on combating extremism, white supremacy, as well as online radicalization. That is something the president expects to raise tomorrow when he meets with the leader of New Zealand at the White House.
Two different countries, two very different responses to these tragedies. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Josh, thank you. And turning now to overseas, where today European Union leaders are meeting to discuss whether or not they're ready to issue their strongest sanctions yet to the Kremlin in the form of complete embargo of Russian oil. That move would be a massive financial blow to Moscow's war efforts, given just how much Europe relies on the country's oil. That deal is expected to include an exemption for Hungary, and top EU leaders are saying there's no deal just yet, but they are saying signs point to that move happening soon. That's happening after another round of intense fighting in the Donbas region. Local officials say Russian troops are on edge at Severodonetsk, a key eastern city. Ukrainian forces are basically just left to defend ruins there, with President Volodymyr Zelenskyy saying 90% of the buildings in that city are destroyed. Our Cal Perry is live in Kyiv. And Cal, starting with that oil, this would be a major step by Western allies. What can we expect Moscow to do in return? Have they responded at all?
Well, you can expect them to shut off natural gas to some of these countries. We've already seen that when it comes to Bulgaria and Poland, for example, who were early out in front of that oil embargo. But we're not there yet. Hungary is still holding out. Now, Hungary needs Russian oil, and we're talking here about crude oil, not just natural gas and crude oil, but crude oil alone. And one of the things that Hungary has been saying, and we heard today from the Prime Minister, is that they want some kind of a guarantee that if there's a problem with the pipeline, if there's some kind of leak or some kind of accident, that they will not be prohibited from getting that crude oil via shipping. So what is being talked about is an embargo when it comes to crude oil by shipping only. I think the other important thing when you talk about this is that Russia is going to lose out on a great deal of money here, money that it needs to fight this war. This is what we heard from Secretary General Austin, the Defense Secretary of the United States, when he was here to try to cut off the lifeline so that they cannot rebuild their military because, of course, they're taking such heavy losses here. That said, Stephen, this does point to the fractures that exist in Europe. So many of these countries rely on Russian energy, and energy prices are only rising here as they are in the rest of the world, and that is a consideration as well.
A lot to consider there, including the battlefield. We understand that Zelenskyy made his first trip to the front line since the war began with a visit to Kharkiv, but we're also learning that he fired the head of Ukraine's security service in that region. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that official was relieved of his command because, according to the president, that official worried more about himself than he did about securing the city of Kharkiv. The city of Kharkiv fell to Russian forces. Russian troops had conquered that city, had taken it over, and it was only because of a Ukrainian counterattack that they were able to push those Russian forces out. That is one of the things that makes this visit significant by the president. The other thing that makes it significant is, as far as we know, this is the first time that he has left the capital city since the war began, and the fighting is raging close to where he visited. In fact, a few hours after he left, we understand that that city fell under artillery fire. It is a reminder that the city of Kharkiv is within Russian artillery range. It is one of the reasons that you continue to hear Ukrainian officials ask for longer range, both artillery from the United States and this long range rocket equipment that they're asking for from the United States. Now, President Biden today said that he is wary and is not going to give that kind of technology to Ukraine. He does not want Ukraine to be able to fire rockets into Russia. It's a concern amongst the United States and NATO allies that would only widen this war.
Developments continue there. Cal Perry, thank you. Well, the unofficial start to summer is here. The problem, though, for some people, it's turned into just a giant travel nightmare. More than 8,000 flights have been delayed or canceled between yesterday and today, according to the database FlightAware. A lot of the issues come from bad weather. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But it's also part of a larger issue, the travel industry facing so many obstacles. There are staffing shortages, rising costs because of inflation, especially gas prices, and there's also a rise in travel that's looking a lot like pre-pandemic levels. AAA projecting that more than 39 million people are traveling this holiday weekend. Travel experts have been waiting for this. They say data shows a major recovery for travel is getting started because of all of the pent-up demand after 2 years of heavy restrictions. Our Gadi Schwartz joins us now. And Gadi, with all these factors coming together, the travel industry trying to juggle all those situations, are these industries capable of handling this demand? And what does that tell us about the summer travel season that's just getting started?
Yeah, well, when we're looking at the summer travel season, you could sum it up by one word, and that is expensive. Expect it to get a lot more expensive. As to whether the industry can absorb this return to this pre-pandemic almost normalcy, and that's still yet to be seen. What we saw in those cancellations this weekend are a reflection that there is still a lot of demand and not enough supply. And in this particular case, those are seats on airplanes, but those airplanes need somebody to fly them. And so to give you a perfect example, a microcosm of the unintended consequences that we saw during the pandemic, you remember during the pandemic, travel fell to 80–90% below what it was. And so what did a lot of airlines do? They had to reduce payroll. Some of the biggest people on payroll were pilots, so they offered a lot of those pilots early retirement. When those pilots took that early retirement, they didn't see as many pilots coming into the profession. This is 2 years going. Now now all of a sudden we finally, after a lot of false starts, we now have people returning to the skies in levels that we haven't seen since 2017, 2018. And so all of a sudden, those pilots that you needed to fly the plane that took that retirement, there just aren't enough of them to go around. So airlines are actually pulling other pilots from other airlines, which isn't necessarily making new pilots. It's just pulling from different airlines. So that's one of the issues that's at hand here, and that's one of the reasons why you're seeing cancellations all over the world.
A bit of a perfect storm on that front. And you mentioned expensive. One of the other big issues, the cost of travel. Gas prices are at record highs. The national average fluctuating around $4.60 a gallon, 50% higher than they were a year ago. What are you hearing about that and how it's affecting people's holiday travel? I know you're in California. Those numbers behind you are pretty scary there, Gotti.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, from what I've been hearing is people are resorting to some math. They're looking at the higher prices when it comes to air travel, and they're trying to calculate, wait, hold on. OK, so this is how much a plane ticket is going to cost me. But if I want to travel 600 miles to 1,000 miles and I'm paying $6.19 a gallon, how much is that going to cost me? And am I actually going to save money? Because here in California, we're starting to see these prices that are now anywhere from $6 to $6.50. And there's a chance that they could keep creeping up as the summer continues. Stephen?
Yeah, it just stings to see those prices. A lot of people still hurting out there. Gotti, thank you so much for that update. And here's the deal with the weather this Memorial Day. For some parts of the country, like the East Coast, it is great. There's warm and sunny skies, but then you got parts of the Midwest where 11 million people are under the risk for severe storms. Here's some early images from we're seeing damage caused so far. We're talking hail the size of softballs, destructive winds up to 75 miles an hour, even tornadoes reported. In Sioux Falls, over 8,000 people were without power earlier today, and the tornado sirens, they were activated overnight. And that severe weather is stretching into the work week for some parts of the country. We've also got the first hurricane of the Eastern Pacific season, Hurricane Agatha. It made landfall as a Category 2 hurricane on the coast of Mexico just as we came on the air. Michelle Grossman has the latest for us today. Michelle, so much going on. Lots of flights today got canceled because of bad weather. When is the Midwest going to see some relief, Michelle?
I know. Hi there, Stephen. Yeah, we're looking at a long duration storm event, and we're looking at a really dangerous situation as we go throughout the nighttime hours into parts of Tuesday. We have a particularly dangerous situation, especially in the state of Minnesota, where we're going to see long track tornadoes. We could see a severe weather outbreak as well. We're looking at really gusty winds. This is what it looks like on radar right now. So this is a system that has cold air on the backside. So we're seeing feet of snow in the highest elevations of the Rockies, the northern Rockies. And then we have really warm air out ahead of it. That's triggering some severe weather today. We're looking at a tornado watch. That's the first, or the bottom watch box. We'll say that pink line, including Sioux City, or just to the west of Sioux City. And then we're looking at Minneapolis. We have a tornado watch until 10 p.m. This is what we're concerned about as we go throughout the next couple of hours. So this is from the Severe Prediction Center. We have a enhanced risk. We have a moderate risk. We don't often see a moderate risk. That's where you see that dark red there. So 11 million people at risk. We could see really strong long-track tornadoes, baseball-size hail, even as big as grapefruit in some instances, damaging winds to 80 miles per hour. We just had a report of a 90-mile-per-hour wind, so they could gust even that high. So where you see the red, that is the likeliest area. Even the orange, that's your enhanced, so stretching down to parts of the Central Plains. Of course, it's going to cause some problems in the air, also on the roadways. So we're looking at likely delays in Minneapolis, also looking at possible delays from Seattle to Portland, Salt Lake City, and Denver. And we're looking at some scattered showers and thunderstorms in the southeast, too. So we included Orlando and Miami in that as well. Now, if you're traveling along the roadways, especially in the state of Minnesota, I urge you to tell your friends, your family, to get inside, have a phone next to you, stay near the TV, have those alerts handy because you need to have a safe plan as you head throughout the nighttime hours. But I-90 to I-94, Seattle to Minneapolis, we are looking at some trouble there. Stephen?
Got to stay prepared, and we may have the unofficial start of summer, but we know the official start still weeks away. And we've already seen record temperatures in places like Mississippi and Texas just a few weeks ago. What does that mean for the rest of the summer's outlook, and how are these going to impact the storms that we've been seeing in places like the Midwest?
Yeah, it's been so warm, so early, and for so long. We've broken so many records really early on in the season, and we're continuing to break records. So many of us feel warm today. It's summer-like in so many spots, 80s and 90s. Here's the problem here. So for the setup today, we have that spring cool down. We have temperatures in the 40s, the 50s. We had that snowfall I was talking about. Out ahead of this system, we're looking at expanding heat. Look at it stretching from the Great Lakes to the Midwest, even New England down to the southeast, the south central states. In between there, you're going to get that clash zone. You're going to get that battle zone. Mother Nature just wants to be at peace. It wants to be in balance, and that's why we have the problem. So look at Casper, Wyoming, 48 degrees. That is 24 degrees below what is average for this time of year. And then we're looking at temperatures in the 90s in Chicago. That's 18 degrees above average. Detroit, 88 degrees, 13 degrees above what is typical for this time of year. It certainly feels like summer in the Northeast as well, too, with temperatures in the upper 80s, some spots in the low 90s. We're going to climb even higher tomorrow with temperatures in Philadelphia, 95 tomorrow, 93 in New York City. The good news is we're going to average out once again as we head towards the later part of the week. But it's going to be warm for quite a while. So by Friday, 71 degrees in New York City. Stephen?
All right, and as much as I hate to do it already talking about hurricanes, we got to talk about Agatha out in Mexico. What can you tell us about what kind of damage we could see from that?
I know. I can't believe it's that time already. Well, it officially made landfall, so that's the most breaking news. It made landfall just a couple minutes ago with 110-mile-per-hour winds, a Category 2 storm. It's going to weaken pretty quickly, but we could see 20 inches of rain in some spots, some life-threatening mudslides. And this is interesting here. You can see that spinning there. What's interesting about Agatha, though, is the track is taking it over Mexico. It could emerge back into the Gulf, and it could reform into a tropical system. So we're going to continue to watch that. Stephen?
A lot to pay attention to. Following it all for us, Michelle Grossman. Thank you so much. Well, still to come, a boating accident claimed the lives of 5 people who were trying to enjoy the holiday weekend. The investigation into what went wrong. Plus, authorities say a man went after the Mona Lisa to protest climate change, the disguise he used before pulling a pretty strange stunt at the Louvre Museum. We'll be back. Welcome back. Authorities are searching for answers in a deadly late-night car crash in Lincoln, Nebraska that left at least 2 people dead and another 19 injured. Lincoln police say a car crashed into a large crowd just before 11 p.m. last night. First responders describing a chaotic scene in the moments after that crash. Let's listen.
People laying in the street, got hit by the vehicle cliff.
Maura Barrett joins us now with more. Maura, these images, they're absolutely terrifying, but there's still so much we don't know. What can you tell us so far about this crash?
It is really tragic, Steve. Basically, late last night, overnight in Nebraska, one car that was driving hit another car going the opposite direction. And then after that initial impact, they moved onto the sidewalk where people were standing nearby. And like you said, 2 people we know, females, were killed. 19 more were injured. First responders going on to describe people laying in the street and reporting that one of the cars was even on fire. And so we do have some of that video you can see on your screen. I want to warn you that the additional video we have is very disturbing and graphic in nature. And the thing is that we don't know still, and we're waiting for updates from officials, is that whether or not this was an accident or whether it was an intentional, but we do have an update in terms of those that were injured. One of the people is in critical condition, while the other 18, though, are said to be in non-life-threatening condition. So a little bit of good news there, Steve.
Still, 19 people. That is troubling. And more, we also know there was an event happening, AmeriCruise. It's an annual Memorial Day event there in Lincoln. Is there any evidence that these 2 things could be connected at all?
So, right, this is an annual event that happens for Memorial Day. People flock from all over their state with their cars, trucks, bikes to Lincoln. It's about 50 miles from Omaha to show off their rides down that main street, O Street, that they were on last night. Though Lincoln Police Department says that the 2 cars that struck each other and then hit the people standing nearby were not involved in the actual AmeriCruise event, though it does appear that the people that were out on the sidewalk that late at night were there to spectate it. So still a little bit of a connection there, but we do know that the cars themselves were not involved in the event, Stephen.
Makes sense. More people out there due to the holiday weekend and that event. Maura, thank you. We know you keep tabs on this for us. All right, turning now to Georgia. Authorities are investigating the cause of another holiday weekend tragedy. The Georgia Department of Natural Resources say this man, Mark Stiegel, has been charged with boating under the influence for a crash that killed 5 people Saturday morning on the Wilmington River. The Coast Guard called in to help with the rescue and recovery efforts. 4 of those victims, all from the same family. But tonight, it's still unclear what exactly led up to that crash. NBC News correspondent Ann Thompson joins us now. And Ann, we're learning more about the victims and what happened. What more do we know?
Steve, this is just heartbreaking. 4 of the victims come from the Leffler family. Chris and Lori Leffler, husband and wife, and their 2 sons, 17-year-old Nate and 23-year-old Zach, all were killed in this accident. Their daughter, Katie, who we are told is a teenager, she survived along with another friend, also killed in this accident on the other boat that apparently Mark Stiegel was operating, is a man named Robert Chauncey. He's 37 years old. But I can tell you, Chris Leffler was a teacher at a private school in Savannah, Georgia, called Calvary Day Academy, and he was also a football coach. And that school has wrapped its arms around Katie. They have established a memorial fund for the family, and they promise to walk with her as she navigates this dramatic change in her life. Steve?
So glad to hear that she has support there, Ann. And we know there are accusations of driving under the influence here. And unfortunately, the Coast Guard says alcohol plays a role in some boating deaths each and every year. What are they saying about that?
Yeah, it's not a surprise if you've ever been out on a river or at the ocean on a hot, sunny day that people are drinking. And in 20% of fatal accidents on the water, alcohol does play a role. But it's not the only thing. The other thing that the Coast Guard reminds us is that when you are on a boat, you need to wear your life vest or some kind of flotation device, because when an accident happens, when 2 boats collide and it happens quickly, you don't have time in many cases to just go and try to find that flotation device. You could be knocked unconscious, and so that flotation device, if you're already wearing it, could well save your life. So that's another thing to think about as well.
Absolutely. Another reminder of how important that boating safety is. Ann Thompson, thank you so much for that report. All right, let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, rescuers recovered the bodies of 21 people in Nepal who were on board a plane that crashed yesterday. That plane was flying to a popular hiking destination before it slammed into a mountain, according to authorities. There's still 1 person missing who was on board that fatal flight. No word yet on what caused the crash. Number 2, the World Health Organization announcing nearly 260 confirmed monkeypox cases worldwide. The CDC reported 12 confirmed cases in 8 states here in the U.S. Officials say it's still too soon to tell if the outbreak will lead to a pandemic, but right now there is a window of opportunity to stop the spread. Number 3, the FDA is investigating a hepatitis A outbreak, possibly linked to organic strawberries. This is related to 2 brands of organic strawberries sold at several retailers. The FDA is advising people not to eat strawberries purchased at H-E-B or Fresh Campo because between the 5th and 25th of April, March 5th and 25th of April. Well, number 4 now, new video shows a man in a wig throwing a cake at the Mona Lisa painting. It's an apparent climate protest stunt. Sort of hard to believe that that's actually happening. That young man reportedly arrived in a wheelchair before jumping out to throw cake at that famous painting and yelling, "Think of the Earth." He was immediately escorted out. It looks like there's some cake on the painting, though, but no actual damage because it is behind a thick layer of glass. And number 5, the San Francisco Warriors will face off against the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals this week. The matchup was set after the Celtics beat the Miami Heat last night. The Warriors are looking to win their 4th NBA title in 8 seasons, while the Celtics are trying to win their first championship in more than a decade. Well, final preparations are underway in London for Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee this week. She's the first British royal to serve 70 years on the throne. This week's events, including the Queen's birthday parade, a slimmed-down balcony appearance by the royal family, and a service of Thanksgiving at St. Paul's Cathedral. All eyes will also be on Prince Charles, next in line for the throne, of course, as his mother's age has recently kept her away from some royal duties. Some say the Jubilee could provide a glimpse of what the monarchy could look like under Charles. NBC's Keir Simmons has the latest from outside Buckingham Palace.
Hey there, Steve. Well, this is noisy, but pretty spectacular. We're right in the center of where the celebrations will take place this week. This is the world-famous Mall in central London. That is Buckingham Palace behind me there, Steve. In front of it, a concert platform, as you can see, and you can hear them rehearsing. And then behind it, the Buckingham Palace balcony. They expect 1 million people on the streets of London. Many eyes will be on that balcony to see if the Queen, now 96 and frail, makes an appearance on the balcony. And then who is with her? Will she be with, as we expect, Charles and Camilla, William and Kate, and not so many other members of the royal family, sending a message about a slimmed down public-facing royal family and about the heirs to the throne, showing the kind of line, the lineage, the royal lineage, if you like. So I think people will be looking for indications, signs of what the future holds, and also for how the Queen is doing. We do expect to see her on a carriage here on the Mall, riding up to the parade ground at the other end there, but that's one of the many events that she may have to cancel if she doesn't feel up to it. She is, Steve, 96 after all.
It'll be interesting to watch that play out. Keir Simmons, thank you so much. Well, Mississippi is calling the next story the state's largest public embezzlement scheme ever. Coming up in tonight's Backstory, the lawsuit NFL Hall of Famer Brett Favre is facing because of an investigation into an experimental drug used for concussions. Welcome back. Did you get out to the movies this holiday weekend? Tom Cruise's Top Gun Maverick was the #1 film, and it's helping the movie industry make a big comeback. We'll have more on that coming up in just a few minutes. But first, it's time for the Backstory. It's our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. Tonight, we're digging into a story that officials down in Mississippi called the state's largest public embezzlement scheme in history. A thorough investigation of records, interviews, and text messages by Mississippi Today show how a founder of a Mississippi nonprofit and the state's Department of Human Services made a deal with NFL Hall of Famer Brett Favre and a biotech startup to direct millions of dollars of federal welfare grant funding toward the development of an experimental drug used for concussions. The investigation showing that the deal was made possible through connections introduced by then Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant. He was set to accept stock in the company just after leaving office. Bryant has since said he never intended on accepting the stock and did not read his texts carefully enough to understand the company got public funding. It's important to note officials have not accused Bryant of a crime. The scheme, though, has led to the arrests of 6 people and lawsuits brought by the state against Favre and 3 pro wrestlers who also benefited from these funds. Joining me now is Mississippi Today reporter Anna Wolf, who broke this story. A lot going on here, Anna. Take us back to when this first started, when you first started digging into Mississippi's Department of Human Services and the secrecies around their spending. What tipped you off to all this?
Yeah, so almost 3 years before this whole scandal broke, we learned that the state's welfare department was denying almost 99% of people who applied for cash welfare assistance, what people usually refer to as the welfare check. And when that story came out, no one with any power really looked into it, and it kind of ended there. Also, the federal fund that we're talking about, temporary assistance for needy families, is kind of a bygone program with really lax federal oversight. So that helped in terms of the program being ignored, but also being a target for corruption. So only around 5 to 10% of the money that we get from the federal government was actually going to needy families. And I wanted to know where the rest of the money was going. But the department put up these huge barriers to getting information, rerouting all of my communication through legal, that kind of thing. So I started writing stories about how secretive the agency was being with their spending. But I was also grilling this one employee at the time, who would actually talk to me. And what I didn't know is that he was gathering information about misspending to take to the governor, who gave that information to the auditor. And it was a small tip that started the initial investigation, had nothing to do with this company that Brett Favre was representing. But as soon as investigators started pulling that thread, it really began to unravel.
Fascinating. And they tried barriers, you say, and you got right through them. Glad to hear that. And then you also realized this was a bit bigger than just the nonprofit, and Nancy knew. Mississippi Today's investigation also uncovered texts, money flow, a variety of interviews, including with the former governor for 3 hours. First of all, how did you go about getting your hands on those texts and those receipts? And how did you convince the former governor to speak with you about this?
Yeah, so doing all of that, that reporting in the past really helped in developing sources. And there's, dozens of people in the last 2 years who, in whatever profession they're in, have been trying to get to the bottom of this very complicated story with lots of twists and turns. And some of us have gravitated towards each other and kind of bonded over that shared experience of sometimes banging our heads against a wall. So eventually I earned enough trust from sources who had the text messages to show me, which not only revealed this larger story about what looks to be a planned payout for the governor and Brett Favre, but also raised questions about why it took a brave source and a reporter for the public to know about this. It had been over 2 years since authorities had retrieved the messages. And, if it hadn't been for the stories, would this have been swept under the rug? We don't know. So the messages were so explicit, too, like much more than we typically see. You had Brett Favre saying that he didn't know if it was legal or not, but they wanted to cut the governor in, give him stock in the company. And you had Favre telling the governor that they needed his help to get the project into the end zone, and the governor saying he would open a hole. So Governor Bryant doesn't typically grant these kinds of interviews, but when I laid out to his representative, all that I had, I think that they felt that they didn't have a choice but to address these messages head on and come up with some kind of explanation, which, as you said, was that he didn't read them carefully enough to appreciate what Favre was asking for.
Impressive reporting indeed. And we now know Mississippi officials are considering this the biggest embezzlement scandal in state history. And just as a reporter, you start pulling on threads. All of a sudden, you see it getting bigger and bigger. When did you realize just how big this actually was?
Yeah, it doesn't get much better or bigger than an NFL legend like Brett Favre steering welfare money in the poorest state in the country to himself. But what also lets me know how big of a story this is talking to the people who were so harmed by this scheme. So I talked to a woman shortly after the arrest who had been on TANF for years and was arbitrarily kicked off. And, TANF is supposed to be a work program, and she was not, the program did nothing to offer her opportunities or get her into gainful employment. And even though the welfare check is pretty small, it's only a couple $100s, it really can make a difference. This woman had 3 kids, one going into high school, and she told me that she often worries if she can afford things like soap and deodorant. And so when you juxtapose that experience to, someone like Brett Favre earning $1 million from the program, it just makes it all the more devastating.
Yeah, absolutely devastating to hear details like that. It's interesting to see what fueled you to continue on in this investigation. Anna Wolf, reporter with Mississippi Today. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, still ahead today, Johnny Depp hit the stage last night, performing a show overseas over the weekend. It was a surprise performance as he awaits a verdict in the defamation trial between him and his ex-wife, Amber Heard. More on that coming up next. Welcome back. NBC covers hundreds of stories each and every day, and because you couldn't possibly read, watch, or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, a 5th grade student in Florida was arrested after allegedly threatening to carry out a mass shooting. Authorities say the 10-year-old boy was charged with making a written threat to carry out a mass shooting at an elementary school. Officials said the threat happened days after the deadly mass shooting at the elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. But from our West Coast Bureau, Arizona Cardinals player Jeff Gladney was killed in a car accident early this morning. The 25-year-old was a former TCU football standout who became a first-round NFL draft pick. Tributes from his team poured in on social media mourning this loss. Also from our West Coast Bureau, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, was booked on suspicion of driving under the influence. He was involved in a car crash with another driver late Saturday night. No one was hurt in that accident. He now faces 2 misdemeanor counts. Well, Johnny Depp making a surprise appearance on the stage last night at a UK venue, while everyone that's been following the defamation trial between him and his ex-wife Amber Heard are now waiting for that verdict. He showed up at guitarist Jeff Beck's concert in Sheffield, about 40 miles southeast of Manchester. Videos of him playing the guitar and singing John Lennon's Isolation surfaced on social media soon after. Depp and Beck released their first single together back in April of 2020. Tomorrow, the jury in Depp's trial with Heard is expected to pick back up deliberations after this long weekend. They've seen weeks' worth of emotional testimony and evidence culminating on Friday with closing arguments, with Depp and Heard's lawyers accusing the other's clients of being abusive and manipulative. Danny Ceballos joins me now, watching this case closely. Danny, jurors of this trial have deliberated for 2.5 hours on Friday before break-in for this long weekend. They've seen a lot of evidence so far. How long do you think it'll take to actually get that verdict?
It's hard to say because it's been weeks of evidence that they have reviewed. But at the same time, it's entirely possible they could go into that jury room, the door shuts, they take a poll and say, we don't believe either side. And if that is the case, then all of that evidence kind of goes poof into the ether. So it's at this point, it's always hard to guess at how long it will take to go through jury instructions and deliberate. But in this case, the jury instructions are relatively, or I should say, comparatively short. And the jury might come back sooner than we've seen in other trials.
And with all of the testimony, we've heard all the details. It's important to remember what this is all about. For Depp to win this, the jury's got to find that Heard's op-ed defamed him, and she did so with malice. How well do you think both sides have sort of driven that point home in the closing arguments that we saw last week?
For defamation, you need a false statement about somebody, and that's key here because the Washington Post article doesn't clearly say Johnny Depp specifically. So that's an element that has to be proven, and there has to be damages as well. And that's on both sides for each of their defamation cases. For the defense, Amber Heard, they gave compelling closing arguments, and in a sense, they had the law on their side. They were correct when her attorney said, if you find there was at least one incident of abuse, any incident of abuse, then you must essentially enter a verdict, a defense verdict for Amber Heard. That is a correct statement of the law, that if it's true that there was any abuse, then Amber Heard was not lying in her WAPO article, and therefore she cannot be committing defamation because truth is an absolute defense to defamation. Of course, Amber Heard has her own case against Depp, a counterclaim. Candidly, I think the theory of that claim was so complicated and that was buttressed by her attorney's argument in closing. I just don't think the jury fully understands it. I think they struggle with it. I actually think both sides get 0.0 defense verdicts all around. Nobody wins, a pox on both your houses.
Wow, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. Danny Ceballos, thank you so much for that analysis. That is a wrap for this hour. Hallie Jackson now. We'll have more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place, and our coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.